It's synonymous with the Prodigal Son story. On one side, you have the systems and the display of power, wealth, and economics, and that was certainly alive in Jesus' day, under the empire of Rome, under the collaborators of the Hebrew people. Wealth played a significant role in people's lives and the system, the way that cultures assimilated back then. So on one hand, we have the powers of economy and wealth that snare so many people. On the other hand, you have God's economy. And what is God's economy? What is God's spiritual economy? What is God's dream for this world? God's economy is grace. Grace. That's what God's economy is. Now, I don't pretend to have this wealth of political or economic knowledge about various systems and things like that. And I won't compare one system to another system and say which system is better for economy or politics. But what I can do as a person who senses the will of God, who longs to know God's heartbeat in this world here and now, what I can do as a person who studies Scripture, as a minister who shares Scripture, what I can do is take the systems of this world, the economic systems, the power structures of this world, the political systems of this world, and I critique them from God's economy of grace, from God's call to righteousness and God's call to justice. I can take those heartbeats of God's Scripture. I can take the theology of grace, the practical theology of grace, and I can turn around and look at the world that we live in. All of our messy lives, the systems of politics, the geopolitical systems of the politics of the world, the economies that we live in. And from God's economy of grace, I can look at this world, the messiness, the hurt in this world, and I can critique that and say it should not be that way because of what an economy and theology of grace calls for. So that's the authority and expertise I speak from. Not from economic understandings or political understandings or political philosophies, but from just a believer that reads Scripture, lets it saturate my mind and my imagination, my soul, and says to me the things I see in this world, the things that are awry, have just remedy, have grace and compassion that God is longing to share. And so that's the space I stand in, and I hope it's a space that you long to stand in as well. And yet the Prodigal Son story is a story about how only grace is left when all the money runs out. In reality, I see it played out in society all the time. When money has run out, when the social structures and systems operated by an economy of profit break down, grace is often all that there is left. And there seems to be an absence of enough grace providers in a society heavily influenced by capitalism. As a pastor, when I go out in the community and I meet people, I meet homeless members, I meet underemployed members of our community right here in Fresno. And I see the strains and the burden of capitalism that ensnares them. I see people that work hard, they live paycheck to paycheck, and they still fall through the cracks of society. There's great inequity in Fresno. We have a 30% poverty rate for all ages. And when you look at poverty rates in Fresno, for persons of color, it's even more, getting up to the 40% and 45% range. Right here in Fresno, the 5th largest city in California. California, the most prosperous economic state in the United States. And yet, extreme economic inequality. We are the poster example for extreme economic inequality in the United States. Fresno is. Every week I see people caught in the snare and the burden of living in a capitalistic society. I was talking with my mom last week, and my mom who loves dogs more than anything. And she has always been poor. She's worked hard in her life. Smart kid when she was in school, but she's never been able to escape poverty. And from time to time, I have the privilege and opportunity to help her out financially, and we do that. And we we're glad that we were able to do that. Sometimes we're able to help a little bit more than others because my family too feels the strains of a capitalistic society. And my mom needed some help the other day, and so we sent money, but there was a delay in getting that money. It wasn't automatic, it wasn't immediate. The wire didn't go through properly. And so she was desperate, and she had some bills to pay that next day. And what are we going to do? The money isn't there. She can't access the money. When she calls the people to help her negotiate the system, to walk through, to navigate the system, they didn't treat her well because she was poor. It was easy for them to brush her aside. And so she calls me, can you call them? Can you talk to them? They don't have time to listen to me either. They live in a capitalistic society driven by the demands of profit margins. And she's just another person. And so at that moment, I started to think about her plight as a poor person. Certainly there are people that are poorer than her. But we only know the terminology of poor and poverty because we live in such a monetary society. Think about that. Meditate on that. That we have terminologies of poor and poverty because we live in a capitalistic society. Now, I'm sure I could go through the merits of capitalism. You could find pros and cons and things like that. But I just want to, for a brief moment, to critique it from the economy of grace, God's economy, for a moment this morning. Because I think that this is the kind of world that the prodigal son was wrapped up in. He thought if he had enough money, he would have contentment in his life. He thought he would have fulfillment in his life. He thought that aching void in his heart would be full if he had enough money. He could go out and he could live to his heart's content and be happy, be satisfied, be sustained, but the money ran out. Greed ran short. Now let me give you some negative examples of what I see capitalism doing in our society this day. For-profit motives and economic systems reduce humans to producers and consumers of commodities. That's what capitalism is all about. You produce commodities, you demand commodities, you purchase commodities, and they call it a rat race for a reason. And you spin your wheels to get this commodity, or to get this commodity, or to move this commodity. And so many of our lives are in this desperate rat race of commodity-driven economics. Consumer materialism as the supreme base of humanity's worth is a selfish, competitive worldview. Now again, I'm judging this, I am critiquing capitalism from the economy of God's grace. Human endeavors are qualified and quantified by amounts of money. Time is money in a capitalistic society. And so one's worth, one's dignity, one's value is based on their economic wherewithal, their power to purchase. That's how society judges and values humanity when it's a capitalistic society. There's just no getting around that. And so when my mom was trying to find this wired money that should have been there to pay the rent that was due that next day, things had fallen out underneath her. Her romantic partner, I don't know what to call him. He was having heart problems. He wasn't able to work, and he was paycheck to paycheck. When a capitalistic society looks at somebody like that, they don't value their dignity. They don't say, we realize you're in a shortfall, and we realize you're in a crisis. We'll give you a couple more days. More often than not, they don't care. Because the value and dignity of a person based in a capitalistic society is the amount of money they have in their hand at any given time. If they don't have money in their hand, they're invisible in a capitalistic society. Or they are scorned in a capitalistic society. Or they are eyesores in a capitalistic society. And all right, so I'm going to jump around my sermon notes. Oh, they're so good too. How do I choose? Capitalism pits humans against other humans for survival. It's the Hunger Games of economic systems. The Prodigal Son story was like a person winning the lottery. And when the money ran out, And when the money no longer sufficed to sustain and fulfill the prodigal son's life, he had to make a critical decision between life and death. And the prodigal son came to his senses the way the scripture tells the story, the narrative. And the prodigal son decided to return home. And thank God grace was waiting when the broken and broke son came home. That's what the church has to be. Where capitalism and economy and political structures fell our community, the church has to step in and to bear God's economy of grace. It should be a responsibility of all of us living in this culture, this society. God's economy of grace, our experience of grace should permeate this world that we live in, but it's slow to do that. So we have to be subversive agents of radical grace in a perverse capitalistic society. And how do we do that? We lift up the poor. We break down systems of oppression. We stand with love and not Caesar. We stand with love and not political ideologies. We stand with love and not partisan rhetoric. We stand with love and practical application of showing people grace. Last week, during our Lenten activity, we took P&J sandwiches and oranges, those little cutie oranges. We took those out to area homeless community members. And we had a great turnout. We had about 30 people that stayed after church to do that. And we divided up in groups to go to certain parts of this area of Fresno. And what I learned in doing this with my family, we stopped and we found a couple of guys, and they were clearly homeless members of our community. And we stopped and we shared these simple peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and little oranges. And the experience for me wasn't so much feeding other fellow humankind. I mean, that's noble in and of itself, feeding the hungry. But that moment of talking with them was a moment of affirmation. It was a moment of, I see God in you. I see God in you seeing God in me. I see your dignity. I see your worth. I see your value. I don't judge you for how you ended up here. I don't judge you for how society might have failed you. I don't judge you for lack of resources in Fresno. But I see your intrinsic worth and value as a human being right in front of me. And so that ministry last week wasn't so much about going and giving resources and food and whatever handouts we had to give to those in need. It was about affirmation. It was about dignity. It was about the value of human life. That's what that was about. What a lesson. What an experience of God's economy, the economy of grace. Now there is this narrative out there from the mayor who says, you shouldn't give handouts to the homeless. Don't give cash to the homeless. Don't give bananas to the homeless. Don't give food to the homeless. Don't give sleeping bags to the homeless. You only enable them. That's such a foolish naivete. Because what the mayor doesn't understand, because she won't get out there unless it's for a photo op. What she doesn't understand is that there are new homeless people out there every week. When I go and meet homeless, there are people that are newly find themselves homeless for the first time in their lives. They didn't plan on it. I find all kinds of people. I find the underemployed, the unemployed. I find people with stage 4 cancer. I find single parents. I find kids. I find all kinds of homeless people out there. Each one of them has an individual story for how life fell apart. And a lot of people are newly homeless and they don't know where they go. They're scared to go downtown. They're scared of police brutality and the homeless task force. They're afraid of they don't know where to start. Some of these homeless members, they have the disease of addiction. They self-medicate. Some of these homeless community members, they have various mental illness that's not being treated. That they don't know where to begin. And so I think showing them dignity and affirmation and grace is the leading of God's Spirit. It's not for me to judge them. I don't know that I can fix the political economic system that opens up cracks in society, but I can try to. But what I can do is I can give dignity I can give value, I can show love, I can express grace.